Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Nikon Creators Hour. I am your host, Mike Corrado. I've been with Nikon for 35 years and been taking pictures for over 40 years. And we want to bring you incredible conversations with very powerful photographers. And today we have Renee Byer with us, photojournalist, a Pulitzer Prize-winning photojournalist. Renee, how are you? Good morning.
I'm good. I'm good. You know, it's morning here in California. How are you?
I'm good. I could see it's kind of dark out the window over there, but yeah, we appreciate you coming on this morning and dealing with the time zone change and getting up early. I know you and Paul are working day and night. How is Paul doing? How are you guys doing?
Yeah, we're doing good. We are working every day. You know, we're both every single day running out on the pandemic, Black Lives Matter, you name it, we're on it. You know, he hurt his hand protesting, he got mugged, but he's doing okay. He's doing okay. He's rallying back. He was back out shooting some video the other day, so.
Good. I mean, I saw him, like, I guess that night, you took a picture of him working with his hand in ice on the computer, trying to transmit pictures. I mean, as a journalist in these days, I can imagine it's just not stopping. So again, it's much appreciated and much more appreciated that you come together and put together about 8 images of your work that spans decades. And I know that's a tough challenge. So I've talked about this with every person I've interviewed. Thank you for that, because I would hate to have to cull down the work to just a few images over your career.
It was tough. Yeah.
I always love to start with a question I think everybody wants to know. You've had an amazing career so far. You have so much more to do. But what inspired you to pick up a camera the very first time, and how did that lead you to a career in photography and photojournalism?
So as we hear very often, it's our parents, and same with me. Is my father had it as a hobby, and I grew up in the Bronx, New York, and in a small apartment we were in, and my father had a darkroom in the bathroom, and you know, I had no idea what was he doing in the bathroom all the time. Well, he was actually developing pictures and invited me in one morning, and I was absolutely captivated and mesmerized by watching that picture come up through the fixer and the developer, and, you know. And so that's really where I got started, and started begging my mother for a camera. And for my 8th birthday, my grandmother gave me a Brownie Instamatic camera. And
nice.
And I still remember bringing that camera up to the top of the Statue of Liberty, back when you could go way up into the top, and leaning over and photographing down, and the people being so tiny, and seeing this perspective on life that I really never focused on before at a very young age. And this, you know, still taking the picture of the Statue of Liberty, but still that other way of looking at things. And I think that that's what really got me going in photography. I started in art photography, more as an art, you know, studying art, psychology, social work, that kind of stuff. I wasn't sure what I was going to be until my senior year of college. And that's when I did my first internship at the Peoria Journal-Star in Peoria, Illinois. And then it was clear sailing. I was really hooked.
It's a beautiful story, because I remember the day my dad invited me into his darkroom and I saw the process. I think a lot of photographers start that way. I actually went to school for design graphics in college, so the art background as well. And I think those things come together later on as you start to create, and certainly the art background that you have is a pretty amazing thing. At what point do you know, this is it, this is my career? Talk about telling the story, the emotion within you, because I know you have told a lot of difficult stories in your time. The Pulitzer story, the program or story that you're currently working on, Living on $1 a Day. And do these projects ever end? Talk about the emotion involved.
Wow. They never end. Well, Living on $1 a Day, which is the project where I traveled around the world, and we'll talk about that when we get to one of those photographs. That will stay with me a long, long time, because it's sort of tied to the United Nations Sustainable Goals at this point, and where they were trying to eradicate extreme poverty for the Millennium Goals in 2015. And now in 2030, those goals are very lofty, and because of the pandemic, everything has stepped back in time, and so it's more urgent than ever, that story. I see there's not a ghost in the house, but my door is going like this.
That's totally cool. This is the internet. This is what these broadcasts are all about. We need something like that to happen. My guess is there may be a cat on the floor, maybe pushing the door open.
It could be, because, I work hard so that my cat can have a great life. So just like, you never know what might else happen. But that project is really huge. And then, of course, Mother's Journey and the cancer story, and the mother I'm still in touch with, even though I photographed that in 2005, and 2006. And, these stories stay with you forever, I think. I don't think they ever leave you. They almost become your family. And so that, I would say that, the emotions are always there.
Beautiful. Well, what I'd love to do is clunkily start the slideshow of your images. And really, really powerful images. When you sent these over to me, it's like, I'm gasping a bit as I'm looking at them, because every one of them is powerful in their own right. But what a beautiful picture here. We would love to know everything about it. What took you there? Where was it taken? What was your lens choice? What were you thinking when this flock of 1 million birds seemed to be flying around you? Take it away. What's your story here?
This story is amazing. So I was working at the Peoria Journal-Star part-time, and I was working the morning shift, where I had to go out and find a feature photo for the afternoon paper. So I was under a lot of pressure. So I was driving in, Woodland County, and I came across this scene, like Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds. And I stopped my car, and I was petrified to get out of the car to take the photograph. And it was back then, I think it might have been a Nikon FE. I don't remember the camera exactly, but it definitely was a Nikon. And it was back when, there was no motor drive, there was no autofocus, there was nothing. There was just click and go, right? And I got out of the car and I took this photo, and even to this day, I am just blown away at the framing, at everything about it. And it was way back when we were in the company car. We had ham radios, and we had to call back. And so they're calling me, and you're like, 6JL74 mobile buyer to base, right? And they're answering, yeah, what do you got for us, kid? Pretty much. And I'm like, well, I just shot 1 million birds. And they're like, bring it in. I'm like, no, I really did just shoot 1 million birds. And so this was a deadline photo that I shot. But I mean, I love to show this photo, first of all, because I started as a black and white photographer, as in art. And, back in the film days, and I still love that medium, and I still, miss shooting film, because I really feel like there was some kind of level of film in the picture, in the negative, that you just don't get with digital. And, later, several years later, Fred Woodward was curating a book of days, and selected this image, and he was the editor for Rolling Stone magazine. I always thought that was really cool. So so this was like my first real kind of publication outside the newspaper, like in a book kind of thing. And so this picture, some of my really close friends and family have a copy of this image, and it always stops people in their tracks when they see it.
It absolutely does. I mean, again, the frame is like right there. And I want you to speak to a couple of things. But the first thing I'd ask you is, the moment you shot that picture, you said back in the film days, there was no instant gratification of digital to see it. But did you know in your heart you got something major here?
Yeah, I was praying back then. You know how you do, you pray, you like take the picture, but you can't see if you really got it. You have to wait in the developing room and look at the negative, and, so I felt like, wow, I'm praying this is sharp, that this is, that I got this. And this is a full frame. There's no crop on this. This is it, way back. And it's just a discipline that you learn early on, I think, when you, come from a film background. that, you know, you don't have that motor drive. You don't have that, like, okay, I know I probably got something. You know what I mean? You had to really get it back then.
Mm-hmm. Early in your career, maybe, you know, even before you officially became professional, were there other photographers that inspired you or editors that inspired you along the way? I mean, who helped you through your process of learning here?
Oh my gosh, so many. Well, so many greats like Margaret Burt White and Dorothea Lange and Mary Ellen Mark and all these ones that, you know, you study and when you're in college. And then, of course, you know, I had a lot of help along the way. And my best friend lent me her camera, because when I first started out, I didn't have a camera, I didn't have a car, I didn't have anything, you know. And so I had a lot of friends that helped me. And, you know, John White was a real inspiration for me because I was in Illinois at the time. And Pete Sousa, who I met on a flooding assignment, has always been a great friend of mine for a long time. And gosh, there's so many. I would hate to name too many because I'm afraid I'll forget somebody. But, you know, I feel blessed, and I feel like I've had a lot of help along the way.
Yeah, I saw the picture you posted on Facebook of you and John back in the day, and we did the interview with him, as you know, and it aired last week on Tuesday. And it was such an epic interview. But I think John has touched so many people that way because he's probably one of the most genuine people I've ever met. But that's a great group of people that you've mentioned. Let's roll on to this second image, a beautiful moment. Tell us all the details about what's going on here.
Okay, so this is from my Pulitzer Prize winning series of 20 images called A Mother's Journey. And this is Derek and his mother, Cindy. And Derek was undergoing cancer treatments and was petrified of hospitals. And, you know, his mother would take him pretty much kicking and screaming to get him in. And this was before he was going to have a procedure. And his mother just kicked off her flip-flops and just ran full speed up and down the hallways of UC Davis. Just the most incredible picture, because this is basically a bonding of love between this. It's more of a love story than anything else between this mother and her son, who was suffering from neuroblastoma, which is a very rare form of childhood cancer. And, you know, the story takes you through the ups and downs, but this is just such a joyful moment. And there's another really incredible story about this. Years later, this was in my, it's in my room, my dining room, it's framed. I was walking past it and I took a double take. And I looked and I saw that the pager light was going off. I never, ever, ever, I was always concentrating on the emotion and the a relationship and the speed and everything that was going on in this frame, that I didn't notice until years later that it was the actual moment where the pager was going off, that they were supposed to be going in for the procedure. And it just completely stopped me. And I've only talked about it a few times because it happened only, you know, a few years ago. And this was 2005. And years went by before I realized how much is really in this photograph. And this was shot with like a 70-200 zoom lens. And I believe it was the D2H. Yeah, D2H. And so, you know, it's got a little bit of grain, but it really holds up incredibly, because I think it's like 8 or 1600 ASA. But it just says so much about a mother and what she would just break all the rules. And this is what she did, like all the time, just to bring some joy to her little boy.
Yeah, it's another thing, unfortunately, but fortunately, we talked about this, that we have in common. I know neuroblastoma very well. It took the life of a 6-year-old late last year, little Zoe. Talk a little bit about, though, that relationship with the mom, how deep it goes. How long did this story take, or how long did you cover this? And do you still talk to the mom? Because the relationships that I've developed just don't stop. And,
Yes.
you know, the good that comes out of it is now Zoe's mom has the foundation, Zofia Alexandria. And so she's turning it into a positive in her life. Talk about that emotion and that connection that you have with the mom.
Oh, you know, an amazing relationship that I had with the mom. And it was just, you know, at the time I was sleeping with my cell phone. I never knew, you know, I was, you know, she would call me and run things past me and talk to me. And we became, you know, very close. And, you know, it's really a tough situation because, you know, a mom, you know, everything, she wants to fix the problem. She wants to make her son better. And, you know, no matter what you do, you know, it's a sad reality that you're facing. So we still have, I mean, she loves these images, and some of them are really tough. They're really tough to look at, you know, you know, even I can get teary-eyed to this day looking at some of the images. And to her, she said, I can't even imagine my life without these images. They captured so much. And, you know, every once in a while, I'll see a Facebook posting or something and she'll post a picture and she'll really talk about how much these pictures mean to her and how much love she has, you know, and thankfulness. And it just blows me away, to tell you the truth, because, you know, when you're in these situations, you're trying to be sensitive and you're trying, you know, of course, the dignity of your subjects is paramount. You know, and so many times I just stepped out of the room because I couldn't make the picture. Mm-hmm. And she would say, you know, I didn't even know you were in that room, because she was going through so much that, you know, I had become really just a fly on the wall. So, you know, I really basically embedded myself in this family for over a year, almost a year to the day of when he passed away. And so, you know, that bond will never, ever leave, ever. And the little boy, who I absolutely adored, and, you know, she said that he really, really loved me. And so that's really tough too, you know, because, you know, a lot of times I'd be over there and I wouldn't be taking any pictures at all. I'd just be playing with him on the computer or doing something to just add a little bit of hope and happiness. So I think that, you know, in these situations where you're in such a serious situation, you have to bring some joy and of course, compassion. And, you know, you have to let everything unfold in front of you, and you can't sort of, you know, change that reality. And that's a really tough part too, you know, because, you know, who am I to say you should do this or do that? You know, those are big decisions that I am certainly not a professional to make. But, you know, I would say you'll have to ask your doctor, you have to ask the nurses, or you have to ask, you know, and so that's tough because you almost want to go there and ask yourself for them, right? But as a journalist, you sort of have to step back and you have to let those things, you know, unfold.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to make one correction. Zoe had pienoblastoma. A little boy, Dylan, that I photographed years before, had neuroblastoma, but he's doing great right now.
Right.
Does it change the perspective of your life?
Oh, absolutely. This was so inspiring to see this mother who did everything she could. I mean, the love, I'd never seen anything like it, to tell you the truth. And so I feel very blessed to have been welcomed into their lives and to have been able to tell their story. And of course, yeah, it does changes you a lot, I think.
I think a lot of the stories you covered have, and thank you for giving us the backstory on this image. It touches me very deeply, and I'm sure a lot of other people. Talk about this story, what's happening here.
So this is another really, you know, another medical issue. This one is titled Twin Tragedy because it's basically almost a very similar story. But this is terminal illness, and then this is during the foreclosure and the economic meltdown in the United States. And I had just come back from the death of my mother to cancer. And I had this assignment to go and photograph this woman who had ALS. And I walked in and I just thought, I don't think I can do this. I just don't think I can do this again. And my mother had a very strong presence, and she said, of course you're going to do this. This story has to be told. This is what you do. You have to do this. And I somehow got this power to just do this story. So this is Luther and Claire, and her dying wish was to die in her home. And she, so So in this picture right here, he is carrying her from the shower back into the bedroom. As he's doing everything for her. He's like the major caretaker. He's given up his job. Their house is in foreclosure. The Bank of America is calling on the phone saying, you need to, get out of your house. It's in foreclosure. And he's like on the phone as I was taking photographs saying, you don't understand. My wife has got ALS. She can't communicate. I can't, there's nowhere for us to go. So and my husband loves this image. He's like, you have to put this image in. You have to put this image in. Because, again, it's the love between them. And not only that, but because of the power of this image, she was allowed to stay in that home. She got her dying wish. But not just that. There was an outpouring of support, and I think over $20,000 were given to help him with his finances. So it just goes to show, and there's so many examples of this, of images that I've made that go way beyond to places and to people, and they touch their hearts and they want to help and they want to do something. And it just shows that there is such a great shared humanity in this world. And so that's why this picture to me is just such an important image.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned that you got this as an assignment. Did you get the last story as an assignment as well? And some of the other projects you've worked on, where do you get the thought, the idea to follow that story, to tell that story?
Right. No, A Mother's Journey was, I met Cindy French at the Race for the Cure. It was an assignment, but that wasn't the assignment. And I'd taken her picture with her little girl, and I went up to get her name, and then she told me her story. And I was actually working on a story about women at war, basically, and veterans. And I was in the middle of a big project, so I had to put her off for a little while. But I just remember when I was leaving and I was driving in my car and I saw her and she was waving to me, and I said, don't worry, I'm not going to forget you. And so then I brought a reporter over to her house so that we could kind of figure out, is this a story we want to do? What is this story? I wasn't sure what the story was going to be, but the story wound up being for A Mother's Journey was that billions of dollars go to cancer research, but very little to help families struggling economically and emotionally with childhood cancer. And so that was sort of the storyline in that story that I was telling.
And I think it's amazing that you bring that up, where the awareness takes it, because a lot of what I had done had brought awareness to the Ronald McDonald House and the little, donations that they live on, which is even, kind of so difficult during COVID-19 right now, for all these charities. So there's so much that people can do, to create awareness. And the power of these photos that you've taken, and they're just, it's endless, it's limitless what this story can tell people and how they can engage and help solve or try to solve the problems.
Right. I mean, it focuses on our healthcare issues. It focuses on our economy. It focuses on the emotions, and we're still struggling with this healthcare, which, I could do stories till the moon come home on healthcare, to tell you the truth, and be very happy because, just to bring any light to anyone's situation, to me, that's a blessing for me. That's inspiring for me to do, to be able to tell other people's, tragic stories, so that people can sort of get an idea, because it's so hard unless you're walking in their shoes to experience what families are going through. You can try to translate it, but that's a challenge. It's a real challenge to get down there and really be able to be in their shoes, to be able to be in their situation.
That story of him being on the phone with the bank trying to take his house rings so many, thoughts in my mind of conversations about where's the next medication going to come from. Wait a minute, you're missing this report. How can we do the surgery if you don't have the report? And that's minutes before, they're supposed to leave to go to the hospital. But just again, I agree with Paul. Thank you for putting this picture in the collection. I love Paul. And thank you for that story. These are very, very deep stories. And I just thank you for sharing them. Let's talk about this image. You selected this as one of your picks.
Right. So
how does this picture impact you?
So this is the Pulitzer finalist, and I don't know if you know, but to be a finalist, you have to be in the final 3. So a lot of people say they were nominated for a Pulitzer, but you're not ever nominated. You enter. But this is when you're in the final three ring, which I was hoping when I won the Mother's Journal, I was just going to be in the ring. You know, I was like, just let me be in that ring with those people. You know, that would be so cool. And then I won. But this is a few years later, and this is titled Grandfather's Sorrow and Love. Another incredible story. So this is Don Hatfield and his son, his grandson. And so this was an assignment that I was to go to. He had lost his wife, Jeannie, to cancer. And then a month later, his only daughter was murdered in their house, allegedly at the time by the husband. So it was a domestic violence, leaving him at the age of 65 to fight for the custody of his 3 tiny grandchildren. And this is a 9-month-old grandson, and then a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old. And so this image I really love because this was my first meeting with him. I got there, and it takes time. You just have to sit there. You have to talk to people. You have to get to know them. I'm not taking any pictures. I'm just trying to understand what the story is. And he was kind of this gruff grandfather and very defensive of what had happened. So I thought, I'm never going to break. I'm never going to get this access to do this story. That's such an amazing story. And then finally, he's like, okay, what do you want? What do you want? I said, I just want you to be who you are. I just want you to, just what would you be doing if I wasn't even here, And, next thing happens, he's just like, well, I'd be watching the Golf Channel, and I'd be probably just, hanging out with my grandson. And I said, just whatever, just be yourself. Just be yourself. Pretend I'm not here at all. And this is the scene that unfolded in front of me. And it's just like he's got all the weight on his shoulders. He's got this little tiny 9-month-old boy and all this weight. And so I spent quite a bit of time on this story too, and showing he was a very noted impressionist artist. And his wife had died, and he'd been struggling with that. And then, he had been looking forward to this great retirement, and instead, his whole life has changed. And he's inherited a family. And, through the photographs when they were published, he got an outpouring of support and donations for the children. And, it was just an incredible story to be able to do. And I'm so grateful.
Yeah, I was going to ask if you've ever run into resistance, and if maybe for other journalists that need help understanding this, because when I first started getting into situations and photographing the cancer patients and kids from the Ronald McDonald House, I reached out to 2 people, Deanne Fitzmaurice, who I know you know, another Pulitzer Prize winning photographer, and Amy Vitale. And something you mentioned earlier was so important. It's like you're not always taking pictures. You're in the environment, and maybe you're engaging. I would play Legos and play with the toys and do those little things just to get to know the people. I can imagine that you go in there with the camera and he thinks he's got to perform, right? That's why, now, but then you got to break that barrier. So how do you do that, with the subjects that all of a sudden recognize you're there, and then all of a sudden, now it's not a real moment. They're trying to play to the camera, or they're conscious of the camera. What advice would you give to sort of work around that?
I think a lot of it, you have to build the relationship and the trust with your subjects. And I think, you give a little bit of you to them too. You talk to them, and you listen, and when you can sort of like have a few things in common, that can be very helpful. So it takes time. I always say it takes time is the essence of compelling photojournalism, and being able to spend that time with your subjects is really an important piece, I think. So, access is one thing, but also spending that time is the other. And, this kind of long, in-depth, socially relevant, photojournalism, I hope isn't going to be a lost art, to tell you the truth, because it's just such an important fabric of our society to be able to translate other people's plights to people. But yeah, your work is phenomenal, by the way, with these beautiful children suffering cancer, and you bring out the light in their faces, and I just think it's remarkable what you've been able to do. I really
Thank
do.
you for saying that.
Really,
Thank you.
really, really beautiful pictures. And you
Thank you.
got to show that. You have to show some of the joy and some of that, you know, and it's, I can't even imagine those parents must be so delighted to have those images,
Like
especially.
you'd mentioned before, yeah, you know, we're just going through it right now this week with somebody, and that's one of the first texts you get a day or so after the child dies, that the pictures are what matter. But that's what you're doing as
Yeah.
well.
And you
Is
know that the gamut of emotions. So you know, yeah, you may be taking them at the image like, you know, at one of the worst lows of their lives, you know, the biggest and the most sad, and but then you're also going to show the joy. And so, you know, I sort of explained to them, it's almost kind of like a movie where you have a beginning and a middle and an end. And you know, you may not look so great personally, you might not, your hair might not look so great in this picture, but I can guarantee you in another picture it will. And so, you know, you got to kind of sort of hold their hands and bring them through and kind of describe, because if you've done other photo stories, sometimes you can show them another photo story so that they can sort of get an understanding as well. You know, in the mother's journey, I showed her those images before we published, because and that's the first time that I've ever done that, because it was just such an emotional roller coaster that she was on, and I really didn't want to add more, you know, any more hurt to her life. And so, so I showed her the photographs, and she okayed every photograph.
Yeah, that's so important. I think that kind of communication with the parents. So, you know, you're not out there posting pictures or doing anything. And in your world, it's different. It's a journalistic story that you're telling, and you have an
Right.
obligation. Is there ever a point where you would not take a picture?
Oh, many times I don't take a picture. Like I said, I am more sensitive, and like I said, the respect of my subjects and their dignity is so important to me. And so, you know, I kind of go by like the golden rule: do unto others as you would like others to do unto you. And this is really the fabric of how I really think. My mother instilled this in me when I was very tiny, and that's the way, you know. So you know, sometimes I probably miss some really good pictures, but I just feel like, you know, do they know I'm taking this? Is this going to be okay? There's kind of a funny story, because I was covering something once with my husband, and it was in a courtroom, and this woman was crying, and I heard click, 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 and I look over, and my husband's clicking away, and I'm like, oh, I can't even take the picture, you know? And so it's like that. Yeah, it's hard sometimes. It's really, really difficult, I think, to make
The
it.
the word the word you bring up though, and it's what Amy Vitale had told me when I was challenged by it emotionally: dignity. And I think that's what stuck with me since then.
Yeah.
Beautiful image, emotional image. Talk about this story.
Okay, so this is 8-year-old Fatty, and she's working in an e-waste site, electronic waste. You know, so when we have our computers and our cell phones, where do you think they go? Not many people think about where they go, but they go to third world countries where they're dumped. And little children are sifting through them to find tiny metals to recycle. So this is Fatty's tears are streaming down her face from the effects of malaria as she juggles this little bucket with a few metals in there so that she can hopes to sell for recycling. So this is one of those moments where you see the picture and you pray that by the time you put the camera to your face, you can still capture the picture, and that she's not going to say, run away or do anything. So I was completely stopped in my tracks to make this photograph. And it's one of the photographs in my Living on $1 a Day, The Lives and Faces of the World's book, where I traveled to 10 countries and 4 continents to report on the 1 in 6 people that live on less than $1 at the time. So this was in 2009, 2010. I believe this was taken in 2010. So I was working in Ghana, and then I'd gone up into the northern country, and I was working on another story, and I decided this picture was just so important. I have to go back. I have to find this child. I have to tell this story. So I cut my other assignment short, came back, found her mother, found, you know, and really got to know her. And after the picture was published, I was working with the Forgotten International, which is a nonprofit in San Francisco, on this project. Someone found the picture in the book, and when they discovered the picture in the book, they said, I want to help this little girl. And so if we go to the next photograph, you're going to see her 5 years later on the right here. And here she is in boarding school, learning French, learning English, and 4 other children who were helped through a donor to go on to school and to go to boarding school. And so they're now working in this horrible, hazardous e-waste dump site. I mean, this place was so bad that the soot would come through and they would be all blackened, and they would have no shoes, no socks on. And when I went back to my hotel room, that soot had gone through my shoes, went through my socks, and onto my feet. And I realized, wow, what is this doing to their lungs? What is this doing to these children? So that place has been pretty much shut down. And several of these children, which we are still following through the Forgotten International, which is a grassroots nonprofit, which I highly recommend if you want to help, if you want to have a little purpose in life. The grassroots, smaller nonprofits are the way to go, because they really, you can see, you give this and you get this. And a lot of people want accountability, right? So if you want accountability, if you don't want to give to the bigger organizations because you don't want it going somewhere, you want it to focus on the children, I can guarantee you that these grassroots places like the Forgotten International, your money will go where you want it to go, which is fabulous. And so,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So this, I mean, there's no better feeling than seeing a child. And there's several of them from this book project. I couldn't put them all in here because I had to pick 7 pictures, but there's some really extraordinary other stories about the children that I photographed. And just simply because someone saw the photograph, they were moved to do something.
I want you to dig deeper though, because this is a big, big thing for you, right? As your other stories are, but talk a little bit about everything. You mentioned a book, where do you come up with the energy to start the book? I also know you have a traveling gallery that also goes along, with this story. You're finding different ways to network, connect, get people interested in what you're interested in here, to tell the story, to make a difference. These kids are going to school. I watched the news clip that you talked about this a little bit. I mean, it breaks your heart. These kids are digging in these piles for computer parts and scrap metal, and that's how they make their money, from scrap metal. I couldn't imagine having to do that every day. But if you could dig a little deeper into what you do to start to promote these projects once you're that connected to them, to get more reach.
That's the hardest part, frankly. So I have my own nonprofit, Positive Change Can Happen. And that helps support the traveling exhibition, and it helped me develop an audience engagement app so that when you go through the exhibition, 10 of the images have the backstory, and you can hear in my voice. You have a barcode, and you can, it's called You Bridget, that I partnered with, Andrew Devengal, former director of visuals of the New York Times, and his wife, Laura Laforte. And we developed this educational tool so that the pictures go beyond just being up on a wall, and they are a call to action, basically. Mm-hmm. And my cat is scratching now. See, the cats don't really talk about anything emotional.
That's totally okay. I want to step back to this picture while you continue on here, because it's such a powerful image.
Right. Yes. But, so like I said, it was a book, and I was very blessed because David Griffin, the former visuals, director of photography at National Geographic, edited the book. And we had a really good team that worked and helped me tremendously with the editing and the layout and the design. And it's beautiful. It's actually right here. It's over 250 pictures traveling all over the world: South America, Eastern Europe, Africa, India, Asia. The stories.
That's okay. I love this live stuff. That's the power of that book, that impact of the book.
There is a ghost in my house. No, but, the book has been, I'll still be working on this book. I hope that this pandemic sort of comes to a close soon, because I would love to go back, because this picture of Fatty was taken in 2010, then the follow-up was 2015, we're 2020, and she's doing so well in school, and I would love to go back and do some more with her, But yeah, there's so many stories in this book, and it covers almost every issue that has to do with extreme poverty, and a lot of myths that the poor are lazy is so untrue, because they're really the most hardworking people I've ever met. Most of them are working, and they're all trying to do something, whether they're disabled or whether they're thrust into some horrible prostitution, or they're working. And it's that, talk about an inspirational project, that teaches you, like, wow, to be in their shoes, and you get to go home and they don't. And I think that's one thing that's the hardest translation. The hardest translation is when you're there, is that challenge to make photographs that invite people in and don't turn them away. And so to be able to make an image so that you could almost imagine being in their position, that's very difficult. But then taking those images back and being able to get them in the right forum to motivate change is really a challenge as well. So, it's just a 10-year project at this point, where I've developed a exhibition, where we developed the app now so that people can have this call to action, and a website, and the nonprofit. So, in my spare time of my daily newspaper job, this is what I do. So my husband would say, she's a workaholic.
Yeah, I'd probably say that about both of you guys, knowing you. Back from my days of living in California. Another beautiful image, and one that I'm sure, picture, lots of words. Talk about this image.
So this was last year, and this is, I was doing a story on people who are living in cars. So back again on the poverty issue. And this was one of the top pictures selected for Time Magazine last year, their end of year pictures. But this is, when you come upon a photograph like this, you're just like, what I love about this image is the resourcefulness of people who have very little. And the fact that they're using the fire hydrant to create a bath to stay clean, even though, behind her now is a shelter that has shut down. And there's no place for them to go. I mean, they've got, some of them have cars, but they're not even running. They're like, they jumpstart them to get them from this lot to another lot, right? So this is part of a longer story. This is just one image in that story. But I mean, her face, her expression, she looks like she's so much older. Her life is just, you just have a feeling, I think, of compassion when you see this image. You see that her clothes are in the background, drying. She's washed them. I mean, this is her life. This is her world. It's all right there, in this plastic tub where she's taking a bath.
Mm. Were you following the story of the closing of the shelter, or you just happened to run into this on the street?
Yeah.
Were you given an assignment for this? How did this come about?
Yeah, so I did. I was following the shelter closing. We photographed the shelter while it was, the last few weeks of the shelter. Where were they going to go? What was going to happen to the people? Because they were supposedly guaranteed that they were going to have some kind of living space, but they were not. And, a lot of money went into this. So, it's accountability with our, city and our, and those kinds of stories that are so important to do. So this is this kind of is the reflection of right now, the reality in California, where we had this incredible dichotomy of very wealthy people and very, very poor. I think California has one of the worst homeless situations in the United States, and families especially. And I also just got done doing one on a family where there's, where the mother has two little children, you know, and they were living in their car. And it's just, you know, I focused a lot of my life outside of the United States on the poverty issues. And now I'm starting to focus on, you know, more in my community, although I have throughout my years, but I'm really putting a focus on California at the moment.
Beautiful. And this is, I saw this image on a poster when we worked with you with a big museum project, and one of my favorites, and a great picture to close out on. What's the backstory here? It's so beautiful.
Well, I'll tell you, the backstory is this is my great-grandmother's house in Ireland, and in Galway, in Ballinsloe, a little place in Galway. And so my cousin, for the first time, was bringing me there. And, you know, I had my Nikon, thank God, and I mean this from the bottom of my heart, because this would never have translated with a, you know, iPhone, I don't think. I just was so thankful, because out of nowhere appeared this white horse. Out of nowhere. And, you know, in the United States, you don't see that many white horses. You know, you see like brown horses, black horses. But this beautiful white horse appeared as if it was like welcoming me, like, welcome home. And it's such a spiritual experience of me standing here looking at my great-grandmother's house where she was brought up on the land of my ancestors, and this white horse appearing out of literally nowhere. And, you know, it kind of tells you what is so great about photography, about how things can just sort of appear that you don't anticipate at all, you know, and how you get to experience so many beautiful, magical moments that you would never anticipate just by, you know, being there and having that camera on your shoulder. And you know, my husband was like, I'm not getting in her way for this picture. That was a pretty funny moment, because he said he could take, you know, this was my grandmother's place, and he wasn't going to get, you know, he stepped back. So that was kind of a funny thing.
You ever get into a little bit of the, you know, side-to-side shove? Sorry, this one's mine.
You know, I'll tell you, he carries his cameras everywhere, and I don't, because most of the time when I'm on vacation, I want to be on vacation. So, but for some reason, I was like, no, I need to bring the real, I call it the real camera. I need to bring the real camera with me for this, you know. And like I said, this picture, you know, when I had the signing, people just were going crazy over this photograph. They just loved this picture. And
you feel that spirituality. You feel the peace in the moment. Obviously different than a lot of the heavier stories that you tell. But I love this because it's connected to your roots.
Yes, yes. And oh my gosh, I don't think I've ever heard anybody say that they've gone to Ireland and they haven't had a good time. I mean, it was just, you know, the people, and it was just, I met so many relatives. I mean, I was like, every time I turned around, there was a new relative, you know. So it was an amazing experience. I'd never been there before. And then this just was the, you know, the tip on the iceberg, as you would say, right? This was just an amazing moment that I'll never forget, and I'm so glad I got to capture it, you know, on film. I'm not film, on digital, but, you know, I'm old school.
I love it, and I thank you for capturing it. I'm gonna pull you back to full screen now. I feel like I'm out of breath a little bit. These are amazing stories, and as we close out, talk about how important maybe social plays into your creating awareness now, and how often you're posting, and do you use that vehicle to create the awareness for these projects?
You know, I try. I don't have a big, huge following. I'm not like an agency photographer, you know. I don't have a big push behind me, so it's like, you know, I'm always running up a hill kind of thing, you know, determined, and I post things on social media. I have Instagram, I have Facebook, I tweet every once in a while, not the greatest, and I have a website for my book, but I really don't have one for my work. But if you Google, you can find a lot of me everywhere, a lot of my projects, and, you know, we've just kind of tipped on some of the projects. There's so many. I did the Afghan refugee project, which is an amazing project that showed in Perfect now. You know, there's a lot of projects that you can find by just hitting the Google, I hate to say it.
So your Instagram handle is what?
Renee C. Byer.
Renee C. Byer. Your website is Renee C. Byer as well?
Renee C. Byer, yeah, at mac.com.
trust me, I've Googled you. And those of you out there that are tuning in, just Google Renee Byer, and yes, a wealth of information will come up. You know, Renee, these stories are amazing. You're amazing for taking the time, getting up early in California to talk to us today. But I can't thank you enough. Again, I'm a little out of breath thinking about some of these stories, and that's a great thing.
I am so thankful, and it's such a pleasure to talk to you like this. I mean, I haven't really actually had a real deep conversation with you, so this was really fun. And anytime I can get my pictures in the right forum to motivate change is just such an inspiration for me that I would get up at 2 a.m. to do it.
No, thank you, and thank you for sharing all that. And people tuning in, definitely look into these causes and see how you can contribute and help. But more than anything, we hope you've been inspired by Renee's work. It is definitely something that that you should consider in the things that you do, the deep meaning to each of these photos and the stories that they tell. But again, if you just love to take pictures for art's sake, by all means, keep taking pictures. I will say this is the first time I'm doing an interview with a haircut since the pandemic started. So there's something great here. But on a more emotional note, I can't thank you enough again for your support between you and John White of what's gone on with Lily Catherine, the little girl, 11-year-old that passed away this week. You know, just to hear the inspiring words and again, make sense out of all this, because there's a purpose for it. And there's a purpose for every picture that you take. And again, it's my pleasure to be here with you this morning. So thank you for giving us your time.
Thank you.
Those of you tuning into the Creators Hour, another epic interview with Renee Byer. Please check out NikonUSA.com/The Creators Hour for more work that we've done through these times. We hope that you are inspired to pick up a camera and go out there and make great pictures, and you share them with us. So for Nikon, I am Mike Corrado. Everybody out there, stay safe, and we'll see you soon.